y'all know how this subject is dear to my heart. And I could tell you about Dr. Templeton, about Dr. Jim Templeton. I could tell you that she was a hospice doctor and that she was director of memory care in Asheville for 40. I could tell you all that stuff. You can read that. I'm going to be a little bit more personal about how I know Dr. Templeton. In 2003, when memory care was but 3 years old, she came, or no, you came before that, but not much before that, a few minutes before that. My mother was a patient at memory care, and Dr. Templeton was her doctor. And she shepherded us and our family through this entire process, which is, for some of you, as some of you know, it's not an easy journey. And I cannot tell you the number of boxes of Kleenex that Dr. Templeton and I shared in her office. And then I went on with Dr. Templeton's encouragement to do some of the things that I have done. And it's safe to say that I would not know what I know. I would not have done what I have done. That book would not have been written if Dr. Templeton had not been at memory care.
Thank y'all so much.
Get our little box of steps
Oh,
down.
I am tiny.
No, you're good.
I'm short, but it is really good to be here today. What an amazing series this group has put together, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. So kudos to y'all for being here. This is not an easy topic. Talking about death, dementia. Neither are things that we wish for. And for many, it's not something you even want to talk about. But in reality, they're things that happen, and sadly with some frequency. Death to all of us, dementia to some of us. And whether it's personally or to somebody that we love, many of us are touched by it. So I want to add that this is, like Mary, this is a topic that I care a great deal about. It is very much in my heart. I managed both of the issues professionally for many years, and personally, I'll share that my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, my grandfather, and likely some others in my family died with dementia. Who knows what's going to happen to my generation, but I do know in my bones that there are better and worse ways of going through this journey. And I hope to share some thoughts today about some of the better ways. So I do welcome questions. There's a lot to go through, and I really do appreciate being able to have this conversation. It is a really important one. I imagine that we're going to run out of time with a lot more to talk about, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm also really glad that you're here, and you are still at the beginning of this excellent series, so you're in good hands. And these are life discussions that you can continue, that really you must continue. So there's a few things to share. This is my first foray back into post-retirement talks, so there's no PowerPoint. There's no handouts, and it is new territory for me. I am going to read, but let's get going. So most importantly, I want to share some assumptions that I have. And for one, there's no way to manage dementia or death, really, that are the right way. We're all different in what we want. We are all different in what we need. And we're also all different in what we're capable of doing. So you have to take some of that into account as you think about these issues. So no prescription, no list of to-dos, no do's and don'ts. I do believe that there are ways of thinking and strategies that can help along the way, that can ease the burdens of the loss. Grief is inevitable, but so too can be living a life of love and of deep meaning, with or without dementia. So there's another assumption that I have that I'm going to say out loud, which is that death happens. And that's a funny one to say because, of course, but it is something that I've learned needs to be said out loud. That is a very common head-heart disconnect that many of us have, and that death actually does happen. It happens to all of us, and it's as much a part of life and living as being born. It's just part of it. So it's a circle of life with or without dementia. For some people, death is sudden. It's a heart attack, it's a stroke, it's an accident. Those things happen for people with dementia too, the unexpected. And for some, particularly those with dementia, death is slower, it's more insidious, it's a piecemeal loss. There can be some gift in that, and there can also be a lot of hardship with it too. So it's not to say that any of us are in a hurry, but coming to terms with the fact of death is actually a really important part of this process. So I invite you to think about that over time. Now, death is a terminal diagnosis, albeit with no consistent timeline. Some call it the long goodbye, so that when it actually happens, it's shocking. But to acknowledge its inevitability, rather than fighting against it, can be done alongside excellence and care. And it gives an opportunity, if they can come to that acceptance, for joys, acceptance, and for some peace along the way. My brother-in-law's sister died last week after a years-long journey with dementia. I spoke to her family many times over the course of these years, and what her daughters and husband were able to share with me last week was that she died peacefully and she had a wonderful life, and that they too were at peace. So that was quite a gift, because what I happen to know is that their journey was not always so peaceful, and she didn't always recognize her husband. She was often frightened, she refused medications, and they wanted desperately to fix her. And what I also know is that over time, as they began to understand the progressive nature of the disease, their tone gradually shifted from one of fighting against it, from one of disappointment in and resentment of, to one of acceptance and loving through. And it made all the difference. Once her family had accepted the fact of the disease and understood that we could make sure she was doing as well as possible, we could be there for her, we could make sure she was safe, but what we couldn't do was change what was happening. Once they got there, they were able to have some years with her when they could enjoy each other. And of course there were hardships, and of course there was loss along the way, but ones that were less complicated by blame or hurt or expectations that would never be realized. And they understood that the time they had together was limited, it was precious, and so they made choices about how to spend it. And ultimately, when her body was ready to let go, they were able to say goodbye. She had a really good death. And as caregivers, sometimes we forget that death is inevitable for us all. And while we may be at peace about death for ourselves, it's a whole other thing when it's about a person whose well-being is now your responsibility. Being responsible for another life is sacred. It's scary. It requires honoring wishes that hopefully you know, but may not, and supporting them through what can hopefully be a good death when that time comes, not fighting forever against what is happening. This is hard, and it's very sober, and I hope, please know I mean all of this very respectfully. Please know. Here is another assumption. Death exposes how intertwined our lives are with each other. And with the decisions made at the end of life, it's almost never just about the person who's dying. And I mean that physically, I mean it emotionally, spiritually, because when we love each other, we make decisions big and small, taking others into account. So when a person is dying, their life is bigger than themselves. Their decisions often include those around them, with or without dementia. So in January of this year, my father passed away. He was 87, and in his own way, he was ready. About 2 weeks before he died, I sat with him and his partner, and together we had a long discussion about what to do. He had been back and forth to the hospital. He was eating less and less. He'd had a few falls. He had the dwindles. Now, this was not our first talk about his wishes, but it was the first time when the end was actually near, and it felt very real. All of us knew he wanted to be home, and comfortable. And we also knew that he wanted to live fully, as long and as well as he could. So these dwindles, they were starting to interfere with what was increasingly clear that over time, it was increasingly clear that he didn't want to go back to the hospital. His partner worried what people at church would think if we requested hospice, but knowing that they needed somebody to call when something happened, because things were going to keep happening. And they also had come to understand the limitations of the hospital at this point. Ultimately, the decision was made, and my father actually picked up the phone and made the call himself to hospice, but only after knowing that his partner was at peace with that decision, or it wouldn't have happened. All of us thought that he would have time to enjoy the comforts of home hospice, which is a wonderful, wonderful service. But the very next day he fell. He fell and he broke his hip. It was before he was even enrolled. And he landed in the hospital. Now, he had been walking and changing his clothes and fairly independent before then, so he was a candidate for surgery. But that conversation we had gave a foundation that helped all of us through this process. And when his post-surgical course was not as we'd hoped, it was his partner who made the decision for us to bring him home, knowing that my dad's greatest wish was to be at home surrounded by family. And he was at peace with that decision because we talked. So when hospital staff offered physical therapy and inpatient rehab and a path forward, albeit difficult and uncertain, it's their job to offer these options. It's their job. But we have to listen to it and filter them. And his partner was able to listen in good faith and with no regret say, I think it's time to go home. And so we did. Now, my dad did not have dementia, but he relied completely on his partner to make these decisions on his behalf. Decisions around comfort, around home, around family, around his wishes. And it was his partner who had to make that hard call, one we all supported. It was a call to let my dad's body follow its natural course of dying. Now, it's one thing to make a decision like that for yourself, hard life, death decisions. But to be in a position of making the calls for another person, especially somebody you love, is just challenging at best. But it is so much easier when you've had the time, when you've taken the time to talk. Dementia doesn't happen overnight. Its beginning is often very subtle. It's rarely obvious. And the more you've talked before it begins, even after it started, the better position all of us will be in to make sure that choices are honored. To find comfort in what you're doing your best to honor what a person would have done. So if you take anything from this talk, it's to talk. Talk. Talk many times again and again over the years. Build trust, build a team, know wishes, understand that those wishes may change. It's aspirational, but it's the job. And it is possible. Talking will serve you well when the time comes. And if dementia develops, then there's a history and a foundation of information to draw from. So while my father didn't have dementia, his partner was really able to know what to do and was the one who had to make the call. My mother, on the other hand, did have dementia for 15 years. So we had a lot of time for a lot of conversations to draw on for her care. I'm going to talk more about her story in a bit, but let's start a little bit more talking about dementia and the disease of dementia. I'm going to begin with the definition, partly just to make sure we're on the same page. It's a chronic progressive illness. It changes a person's thinking such that they are no longer able to do things that they used to be able to do. It's not an on-off switch. Our brains don't work that way. But there is, by definition, if the diagnosis is correct, dementia will get worse over time. It's a terminal disease, and that if you live long enough with it, you can die from it. And I'm being blunt, not to be insensitive and not to be cruel or crass or anything, but in an effort to be clear. It is something that changes over time, and we don't yet have treatments that will stop it. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of excellent work. It's just not here. Now, it takes years for many people for dementia to progress to its end stage. The average time from diagnosis to death is 7 years. But if you look at the numbers also, the range is more like 2 to 20. So it doesn't tell us that much about ourselves. We don't know where we're going to fall in that range or what the course or the path is going to look like. And it truly is different for everybody. Our brains are different. Each of us is different with what we need. So those numbers are harder to follow. But the message that there is a slow and steady march of this disease, that's real. And a person's capacity for decision making over that time changes. So we have to grapple with that in terms of issues around healthcare, housing, nutrition, death, end of life decisions. And it's not a failure of caregiving to have to grapple. It's not a failure of the person's efforts. It's not even a failure of medicine. Science hasn't caught up yet with where we are. There's a lot of work to be done, and it is the nature of the disease that we have to manage this. So I want to talk a little bit about capacity, decisional capacity. It's necessary for business, it's necessary for healthcare choices, and with dementia, a person may or may not be able to make these decisions reliably and consistently, or in keeping with their usual way of thinking. Decisions about medication or no medication, hospital or no hospital, doctor's visit or no doctor's visit. And then there's things like safety concerns, driving, medications, finances, nutrition, and who gets to decide how these are managed. We live in a society where we focus more on autonomy, but there's also a supported independence. There's total reliance on other people. There's a spectrum in there, both in the reality of how it unfolds, but also in how us as individuals can tolerate it. We figure that out. And at end of life, who makes that call that it's time to allow a natural process of death? These are just real life challenges that we all have to grapple with, and they're complicated when there's a question of dementia and capacity for those decisions. So we all make these decisions all the time, with or without dementia, but many times we're flawed. But when you have a diagnosis of dementia, it's an opportunity to step in and give that support, or it's an opportunity to try and figure out, like, how is our thinking doing? Physicians are often tasked with determining a person's capacity, not competence, which is decided by a judge in a court of law. So I'm not going to do any diving about competence. We'll talk more about capacity. And y'all have, I don't have mine up here, but an incredible booklet that this group has put together, an incredible booklet that does give you guidelines about this. But in essence, if a physician is tasked with deciding if somebody has capacity for a given decision, it's challenging. It's slippery. So capacity changes over time. And this is another one. It's not that you turn it off and on. The path to incapacity is not a straight line. We have good days and bad days. You may go forward and do awesome, and then you have some backsliding. There's a hem and haw about this. And so all of us have good days and bad days, but with somebody with dementia, it may be a little bit more extreme. The terms may be harder. Dementia can cause changes in memory, but it also can cause changes in judgment and reasoning skills and executive function, and that impacts the decisional capacity. The issue is more obvious at later stages of the disease, but early on, there's issues as well. And in some ways, it's even more important to figure out capacity early in the disease because the person still has an awful lot of ability and to be able to use their brains and actually make potentially flawed choices. Poor decisions is one thing, vulnerability to fraud is another, relational changes is another. So understanding capacity and how to identify it is an important part of dementia in the early stages, but it gets more over time. And I do want to say that even somebody at late stages of dementia can have moments when they can have capacity, but it really requires thoughtfulness. It requires a team. It's not a straightforward path. Decisions also are not one size fits all. You know, what to eat for lunch or where for the day versus updating your will. Not the same, but they're both decisions. Selling property, deciding on a medical treatment. So if something's small, maybe pick your battles. But for the big ones, issues around safety, housing, finances, estate planning, recognizing a person's ability or their inability to make a decision is really important. And so like I'm saying, capacity is not a one-time call. And it needs to be revisited over time. Your booklet talks about this beautifully. So how do physicians make a determination about capacity? You know, it is far from perfect. You should know. It's an opinion, albeit an educated one, that in a given moment, that somebody has a moment of clarity, or in a given moment, the person understands. It's a black and white question, but with no black and white answer. Dementia almost always lives in the gray, and I'll say that's one of the things that draws me to it. I think life is like that. But this is an issue where it sure would be helpful if we had a yes or a no. And we sure try to do that. We try to give it a box, but it's easier said than done. So these are the general terms that physicians use when thinking about capacity. Can the person understand the information relevant to the decision that's getting made? Do they understand how this question applies to them personally and how it will impact them over time? Do they get it? Can they retain the information long enough to process it and make a decision? Can they use that information in a rational way to weigh the pros and the cons, the risks and the benefits, so that they can understand the context of the question? Can they reason it through and clearly and consistently during the time that they have to make that decision, give an answer? And can they communicate that answer clearly and consistently? The word consistently is tricky because today is not the same as tomorrow. But can you today consistently give that? And if tomorrow it's entirely different? So capacity for a given moment, you often have to take into account the gravity of the decision being made. Not everybody is going to agree. There may be undue influence for a given decision that make it suspect. Circumstances and decisions may change, and a decision may have to be revisited. So if there is conflict of any kind that develops, or if a person's wishes are not known, or unclear, or impossible to follow, there's a few guidelines that you can look to help make these messy decisions. What values did the person have? Does the person hold dear? What are the risks and benefits of the decision to the person with dementia? What about to the caregivers? What about others who may be affected by it? What's the physical effect and on the emotional well-being of the person with dementia? And what's the effect of the quality of life on that person and the people around them? You can start to take into account things that are less clear and a little bit more subjective. And if you've got a grave decision to be made, it's a lot of times important to have a third party, be it a lawyer, a trusted person, somebody else to kind of be a sounding board. You don't have to go it alone. But capacity is not a straight line. I wish it were more clear. None of these are easy issues that we're talking about, and I am not a lawyer. But when you're faced with decisions around capacity that you're trying to support somebody with dementia, um, approach the decision in good faith. Be kind to yourself and try to move forward. Um, okay. There's another thing that the booklet talks about that I wanted to address. Your booklet talks about the challenge of the two selves, the pre, the post dementia self. And my thoughts about this are more personal than didactic. But past and present are here for us all. We change over time. We grieve what we've lost. I mean, I miss being able to stay up late dancing and then go to work the next day without a problem. For real. But my recovery time is longer now, but the dancing, I'm not giving up. I also miss holding my babies in my arms. There's things I miss. With dementia, the loss is more stark, and memory of what was lost is often gone for that person. And I'm not trying to make light of that. But the pre and post selves are still one person, changed, but one person. And where capacity is concerned, those of us without dementia are able to integrate the experiences that we've had, the ways that we've grown, the changes that we've made over the years, and we integrate them into our decision making. They're part of who we are. And there's no perfect way to do that for somebody else. But sometimes we have to try. Sometimes we have to try. So the hope is that the past self, the current self, the caregiver have alignment in those decisions. Doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes there's a family from afar who are not in the thick of what's happening and are second guessing or are stuck in a time gone by. Sometimes there's grief, pining for the prior person that gets in the way of moving forward with a now decision. Sometimes the now wishes for the person with dementia conflict with those from the past or with this caregiver. And sometimes you've made promises in the past that no longer make sense. And still, those decisions have to get made. The example that comes to mind most commonly is with somebody with dementia is as their illness progresses, a promise to care for them at home. Promise to care for them at home, and you promised. But they've had fires when they're cooking. They've gotten lost. They found ways to work around all the solutions that you put in place. And the fire hazard still puts them and their neighbors and you potentially at risk. And you may not have a choice. Things change. Sometimes it's choices you have to make, and sometimes your hand is pushed and things don't go as planned. It is not comfortable, but it's okay to make a decision. Be kind to yourself when things unfold in a way that's different from what you and your loved one hoped. So it can help as you think about dementia and death, our joyful topic for today. It can help to prepare advance directives that take into account the possibility of a future diagnosis of dementia. The Dartmouth Dementia Directive is one such tool that tries to account for changes and gives a voice to the pre-diagnosis self in guidance about care. They've got in your appendix of that binder that you've been given, that you guys have put together, is a copy of the Dartmouth Dementia Directive. It's a lovely thing to look at and potentially complete. So we talk about dementia as being mild, moderate, or severe, and that's the breakdown that the Dartmouth Directive uses. I personally like to include another stage, which I call end stage, and it's a little bit different. It's beyond severe, and it's when the body is actually starting to shut down. So a little bit different. But if you've not yet looked at it, the Dartmouth Dementia Directive gives you options. So in your pre-dementia self, or even in your early dementia self, these are things to think about. Do you want the full scope of care? Everything possible to keep your body alive. Do you want limitations to that? Maybe, yes, take me to the hospital. Yes, give me treatments, but maybe not a ventilator. There's options in there. You can also say, I want comfort care only, nothing else. And they give a fourth option in this directive, which is I defer to my healthcare power of attorney. So full care, limited care, comfort care, or I defer and I'm going to let my person I've appointed make those decisions for me. And they go through three different things. They go through medical care. They go through where would you like the care, location. And then they go through the questions specifically of nutrition and hydration, because these are the issues that we often face. So I encourage you to look at this and think about it. It has a place where you can write notes to clarify. It is not perfect. None of the tools are. They can't be, because they can't second guess every circumstance that you're going to face. But this does a good job of providing a way to have a conversation and to document it. In fact, it's a very helpful way to document the conversation, but it gets you in with the people that you care about. It gets you in the door with having this discussion with the people who will be in the place of having to implement it. Again, I personally would include thoughts about end stage, because that's going to be different from what I would want at severe. And I also would want to clarify that my healthcare power of attorney can override anything I say on that document, because I am so fortunate to have trusted people around me that I would trust to make any decision for my care. And if I made the wrong one, I want them to be able to fix it. And I can mark my pre-dementia preferences, but I will defer to them because that's what I want. Now, after all of this, I want to circle back. Those are business, and it's important business. But I want to circle back to my mom. And it's the hard and sweet story of her passing that I'm going to share. And I don't know how much time I have. 20 minutes. Okay. Because it can be a long story or a short one. Let's see. So, I will say that my children grew up with a grandmother, my mother, who had dementia, and a mom who was a dementia specialist and a hospice provider. So you can bet that we talked about it. So I tried to be age appropriate, but I've heard many times as they've become grown-ups that maybe I did a little overkill. But what I will say is that my children have a phenomenal foundation for being able to talk about this and for understanding life's course. And I am really grateful for that. And in truth, they are too. So I'm going to skip a little bit so we have time for questions. But I want to tell you a little bit about my mom's story. So it started with us taking care of her parents. They lived with us when I was in high school. And we did end up having to put them into a nursing home because we couldn't keep them safe. But it gave her the information she needed to give us permission to give her the care that she needed. Now, my mom was an artist. She was a beautiful artist. And what she always said was that when the time came, just to make sure that she had a pencil and a sketchbook, and if she had to go into a facility, she'd be okay. And it was a gift for us to have that permission. But it was also something we all hoped would never happen. And in fact, it's not what happened to her. When her dementia was still at a moderate stage, she could talk, she could sit up. Walking was a challenge, but she could still interact in meaningful ways. She ended up at home with her husband and caregiver, who was dying of prostate cancer. She was having trouble eating anything. She couldn't keep anything down. She had been to the emergency room several times. She had studies that showed gallstones, but nothing that surgery could reliably fix or really explain what was happening. We tried a variety of medicines for nausea, for gastric motility, for appetite. Nothing worked. She was comfortable unless she ate. And a feeding tube was an absolute no. That was her long-standing wish. And I'm just taking a moment to pause and say, I'm just going gangbusters with talking up here. But this is big stuff. It's all big stuff. For me, for sure, but I think it is all for you too. And I hope that this is okay. So thankfully, my mom had been clear that unless there were straightforward fixes, she really wanted to focus on her comfort and not be in the hospital or have procedures unless they were clearly beneficial. So she and her husband ended up side by side in one room in hospice beds, holding hands for weeks. It was quite beautiful in many ways. Um, and after so many rounds of trying to fix her lack of nutrition, we ended up switching our thinking. It was not easy. And I will say that people all around us judged us for not digging deeper into the root cause of what was happening. Maybe some of you here will judge us, I don't know. But after our initial failed attempts at figuring out why she couldn't keep anything down, our understanding was that the next level of exploration would involve leaving home, having a more invasive procedure that she may or may not tolerate, being away from her husband, which was hard for them both. And my brother and sister and I all agreed that we needed to leave her be and see what would unfold. I'm sharing this, all of this really, to partly illustrate some of the decisions that you may face because we can't guess them. And I want to share how our family grappled with some of the unknowns because that is the nature of dementia and it's certainly the nature of death. So, per her wishes, no surgery, no invasive procedures, no hospitals, and we focused instead on her comfort. That my siblings and I were on the same page is not to be taken for granted at all. So when her husband ate, my mom would ask for a bite, which of course we gave her every time she threw up. Every time. So maybe a sip now and then would stay down, but it was pretty bad. And this may sound awful, but this is where her dementia was actually a little helpful. She would throw up into a bowl, lift her head, and just smile this sweet smile and say, "What are you doing here?" And not remember that she had just been sick. Honestly, it was awful for the rest of us, but it helped her. And she was remarkably pleasant and sweet through this time. And this is the end stage. This is not severe. This is we're at an end stage. So we continued to offer her food and water throughout the day. She never asked for anything except for when her husband had meals and she saw it because she'd be reminded, "Oh, food. Yeah." And then, and then, and then her husband died. It was on a Christmas Eve. And that was when things started to change. She asked over and over where he was and said repeatedly how she wanted to be where he was. And she was there when he died. I mean, she saw his body. She just couldn't remember it. So I'm going to take the time here to share a little. Um, um, we didn't know how to help her through that because she just couldn't remember that he was gone. And what we did is we got everybody in town, all the grandchildren, my brother, my sister, um, my husband was there, and the children who were not in town. We had somebody in China, we had somebody in Canada, we had somebody in North Carolina. She was in Georgia, and one grandson brought a guitar. And what we did is we took a little bit of time. We went around, and each of us said something that we loved and missed about her husband. And when it got to be her turn, my brother said, "Mama, did you want to say something?" And she just looked up and she looked at all of us there with her. And she said, "I don't know what this is all about, but it's love, love, love." And she didn't ask for him after that. She didn't ask for him after that. And it was something. So we continued to offer her food and water, which she would then cough and vomit. She really just couldn't tolerate it. So my siblings and I, my brother and sister and I, got together again to talk about what we should do. We decided to stop offering her anything. But if she ever asked for it, we would give her food, we would give her water. My sister-in-law was really uncomfortable with this. And when she was the one sitting with my mom, she decided to give her some water. And when my mom started coughing, coughing, my sister-in-law really quickly realized that Mama really couldn't tolerate it. And the coughing lasted for a long time, but my sister-in-law got it. And what I want y'all to hear with me sharing that is that all of us understood why my sister-in-law did that. Coming to terms with somebody dying is a process. It is not easy. And that's okay. There's no do-overs. So ideally, we're all in agreement and we're there for each other through it. So after this episode, my sister-in-law understood. And she no longer had that feeling, that pit in her stomach, that we were doing something to our mom. And instead, we were letting her body do its own work of dying. Now, we gave our mom ice chips. We gave her ointment for her lips. We kept her clean and comfortable. But the next week, on New Year's Eve, she died peacefully. And that was my mom's body's process of dying. Our bodies are incredibly smart. When you think about women giving birth, well, their bodies know how to do that. Our bodies know how to die. They know how to shut down. They know the process. We just don't. So we have to just get out of the way. And it's hard. It's really hard. And it's hard to do that with integrity. It's hard to do that honoring somebody's wishes. It's hard to do that for somebody else. But that's part of what we have to do. So there are other booklets besides this one that I truly appreciate that touch on these topics, these hard topics, that I think can be helpful to anybody going through this, going through dementia, going through death. Hard Choices for Loving People. They're old, these are old books, but they're so good. Hard Choices for Loving People, and Gone from My Sight. Mary, if y'all don't have those around, those are good things to have available. And I encourage you all to look at these as you explore these topics, these really hard topics. So I'm going to close now, and we can have conversation, can hear your questions because I've tried to leave time for that. But this is my encouragement to you. Talk about death before it's close. Talk about death before dementia intervenes. Talk about how death is going to happen to us all. Talk about the possibility of dementia and what you'd anticipate wanting, and acknowledge that what you want might change. Give permission to do what's best for everybody. Have these conversations early on with your family and your friends. It helps people so much to know your wishes and to understand to do whatever you need when the circumstance comes, because you can't second guess them all. The conversations are invaluable and they're hard. Try to avoid making promises that you may not be able to keep, but you can stay high level. I promise I will take care of you. I promise I will do the best I can. And if you've already made promises, be kind to yourself. You can try to honor them, but if you're compromising your own health, if you're compromising the person's health or their safety or anybody else's safety, you may need to let that go. And it's okay. It's not easy, but it's okay. So dementia happens, death happens, and it really, truly is possible to be there for each other through it. And that's my comments.
No, my question is, when your family was discussing about whether to have hospice come in for your father's partner questioned how the church would feel about that. And I was just curious if you could say a word about that. I don't know if it's because of a hospice chaplain or what?
You know, hospice means different things to different people.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, hospice is a bad word.
Golly,
Not
Pete.
to me, and I can't comprehend it, but I know it to be true.
Okay.
And so I think he was afraid that people would think that my dad actually was dying right then, which in that moment he wasn't. But I also think that it was a way of saying, I'm afraid. So it's easier to say they're going to judge than it is to say, I'm afraid.
Mhm.
And ultimately, I think that's what it was. But it gave an opportunity to have the conversation then and there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but not everybody is on board with hospice. It's an interesting, increasingly that's true. And I guess I've kind of come of age as a hospice provider in that period of time. They used to, I would have my first hospice patient, they'd say, well, when do you give me the pill?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people feel like if you call in hospice, we've given up.
That's right. You feel you've thrown in the towel.
Thrown in the
which
towel.
is really just, the irony is that people often live longer when doing
Right,
hospice.
right.
They often live longer and certainly more comfortably.
Thank you.
Other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Talked about when a person is diagnosed. How does that happen? If you're the person in question, you want a diagnosis, or if it's someone you love, how do you go about that process?
How do you go about the process?
Yes, how do you go about the process of a diagnosis of dementia, whether it be for yourself or for someone you love?
So how do you go about getting a diagnosis of dementia?
Yeah.
Whether it's for yourself or someone you love? I'm repeating it just in case.
The process by which you do that.
So the start would be to go to your primary care provider, and the primary care provider can do blood work and labs, do a scan of your brain just to rule out potential causes like thyroid problem
Or organic
or
causes.
something organic.
Yeah, right.
But the other thing is that it takes time to give a diagnosis of dementia with integrity. And one of the things we're lucky about in this community is that we've got memory care, which is not the inpatient residential place, but memory care that can do those evaluations and do cognitive testing serially over time so that you can see what is changing. That's one way. Primary care doctor is the first, but certainly primary care just to rule out all the other potential organic problems. You can do neuropsych testing, which is with somebody who is a PhD, who can do in-depth neurocognitive testing. So there's a variety of ways to get that diagnosis. My feeling is that because dementia is a progressive disease, it's helpful to do it not just one time, going through those tests more than once so that you can see from one time point to another, is there change? That's actually an important part of that.
Thank you.
And there's different types of dementia. This is, we could talk for a long time about things like that. So it's not one size in that sense either.
Yeah.
We're trying to have a baseline before we get to where we think we might have cognitive
So the
malfunction.
question is, do we need a baseline into an assessment before you think you might have cognitive issues? I think it's a good question. Not necessarily. So on the other hand, if that's something that runs in your family, if it's something that you're worried, I would never hesitate to have an assessment. There are a few things to keep in mind that are practical things. Life insurance doesn't like it if you start talking about memory issues before you have them. And if you're interested in getting long-term care insurance or life insurance, do those first. But then, I would also say know yourself. Are you somebody who likes data? Are you somebody who is comforted by data? I'll say that my mom was somebody interested because we all knew that she was having problems before other people recognized it, but she was somebody who just had this crazy mind that did all sorts of things. And when she did her cognitive testing, she did great. But that didn't tell the story of what we were all seeing. So I'm going to say, to your point, when you're doing the assessments, something I didn't say, it's really important to take into account the reports of people who know that person well. Those sometimes are just as important as the cognitive assessments, and it's a special thing that I can say about memory care that achieved at that time. But it is really important to be able to have another informant, if you will, who knows the person well and can speak to changes that they are seeing from how the person has always been.
If a person is well socialized, they can bluff.
That's right. She says is that if the person is well socialized, they can bluff. There's a lot of covering. And you know, a lot of the covering has to do with those memories, those ways of being that we track in our brains. They have many, many, many copies because we've done them for years. Hey, how are you doing? It's so good to see you. You've done it so many times for your whole life that even if you lose 5 or 10 or 100 or 20,000, there's more. And so they're deeply tracked so you can maintain those for longer.
I love the gentleness of your story about your mother being sort of appreciative, and that wasn't my experience with my father who lived with us. He was mad at me a lot. We had to pry the keys out of his hand. So as it comes to capacity, my question is, what happens when you know that he is not safe, other people are not safe, and you have to do it? And I read in the paper where a son killed his mother over the same issue the day I took mine from my dad. So what do you do when they really, really don't think that you're doing something unloving?
So did everybody? So the question is when it's not so easy to take the keys or do or do something, and it's not so gentle as I shared that my mom was accepting of the changes. You know, a couple things. I was describing her at her end of life. I was not describing her earlier on, which was not necessarily as gentle as gentle. And there is a lot of hardship with that. So using driving as an example, driving is a good example because it's one of the few safety issues that involves other people. So your hand is pushed because it's not just your dad whose life is at stake, which sometimes it comes down to, you know, do you have the right to hurt yourself? That's one question, but it's not the same as driving, which is hurting other people. And so I don't have an easy answer for how to do that. Sometimes out of sight, out of mind was helpful. Sometimes they just needed the key jangling in their pocket, but you needed a key that didn't work. But there's no easy answer for how to make those transitions. But to need to make them, it becomes your job as a caregiver. And if we were at memory care, I might sit down and you and I could go through a ton of strategies and that were specific to your dad, specific to you, ways that, you know, you can play hardball, but hardball doesn't always work with dementia. It really doesn't. But ultimately, it's a responsibility to take it on and figure it out. Does that make sense?
Seems to me that not only the diagnosis is important, but what memory care offers is that family support, so that you help people with the process as they encounter these different ways of dealing with someone. Because a person who's ordinarily very sweet and lovely can be very angry and paranoid and accusatory about what you're doing. So having someone walk with you rather than trying to figure it out when every day may be different, it seems that would be very valuable.
That's lovely. And I don't know if y'all could hear that, but finding a place, and memory care is one in this community, but finding a place that can walk through that journey with you of dementia so that you can shoot in real time with the problems that you're facing. There's no surrogate to that. It can be a support group, it can be memory care, it can be neighbors who have had similar experience to have to go through that. It can be books, like some of us are kinesthetic, some of us need to read. So we all have a different way of learning those things. But the question of, go back to your dad, of, you know, if he had a diagnosis of dementia and he no longer had the capacity to make that decision, and you know in some ways, because I'll take a guess and say he wouldn't want to hurt somebody, you know, that, you know, the likelihood is that that's not.
Just a second thing on that.
Oh.
He had a grandson who got hit by a car and died, and my dad did the funeral. So when the doctor is talking, the doctor who was our friend and my dad's friend was trying to say, Dr. Phillips, you wouldn't want to hit another child. What if a child had a ball go out? And my dad, he said, what would you do? And Dad said, well, I'd put my foot on the brake. And he said, but what if you didn't do it in time? And Dad said, well, then the child was in the wrong place.
Oh my goodness.
That was when I knew I was in trouble.
Oh my goodness.
Because he had very aggressive.
Yeah.
And it was a good guy. My dad was
Of
great.
course. I mean, of course. No question here. No question here about that. But dementia is a terrible disease, and it can do things you don't expect. But taking out the spark plugs, I will say that I had a truck driver whose family had one car and they needed it, and they would take the spark plugs out, but he knew how to hot wire anything. And so like it is a very real challenge that we could spend definitely the whole afternoon talking about the how. But for this conversation, what I want to stay with is that you did, which is that you have to own that and take responsibility for it, because he didn't have the capacity to. And recognizing that is huge, and it's a key to trying to manage in that journey. Hopefully he would forget it eventually. Hopefully he has. It may take time.
Well, he's with his maker now, so
Oh no! Okay.
I just wanted to ask you to define memory care, because I just always assumed it was like a portion of Gibbons Highland Farms where they worked with people that were.
Man, am I glad you asked that.
Tell us the
I
real
didn't
answer.
answer it.
But I wanted to say, I'm going to have materials in the back of memory care that you can take home.
So I am now retired from memory care, but memory care, we actually trademarked the name and the day, but that horse is way out of the barn now. So many people associate memory care with an inpatient residential unit, which we are not. In its earliest time, memory care was MAC-IRC, the Memory Assessment Center and Elder Care Research Center, and it goes on. So we changed to memory care, but memory care is the brainchild of Dr. Peggy Noel, and it's unique. There's not a single place like it in the world.
And
We have
are
a couple
so
of models.
fortunate that it is.
We have a couple of models. There's a place in Greenville, and there's one in Charlotte that has modeled themselves off of our model. But it's a model of care for dementia that anytime a person with cognitive issues comes, they also come with a family member or a caregiver of some kind. And language is meant respectfully. Some people don't like the idea of a caregiver, but a person who will be involved in their care over time. And we speak privately to both. We speak together with everybody. But there's a real opportunity for the person with cognitive issues to tell their story. And there's an opportunity for the person not experiencing cognitive issues to tell their story. And then there's an opportunity for everybody to be together. So it's meant respectfully to have those conversations. Peggy established this in 2000. She was a geriatrician who'd been here in practice for 15 years, and the majority of her patients who came with their families because of issues of cognition, and she just saw this as a best practice. Now, when we started, there were not guidelines about this. She just knew that it was the best practice. I joined her about 18 months later, and then together we built the program. Gibbons Estates, we were there because Gibbons gave us free space. We didn't have any money. We had no money. And so Gibbons gave us free space graciously. But we've always been independent. We're still independent. We will teach, we will talk. We are all about best practice dementia care. And in that period, it's now, 26 years ago, but it is now a program that embodies all of the best practice models for all of the professional societies. And is a beautiful way of practicing medicine. But it's not, it's a nonprofit. And it's, and it's a nonprofit because insurance does not cover that kind of care. Insurance covers the time a clinician is with a patient. It does not incorporate the whole care. And so we've had to figure out how to be there for everybody, and that's been a basic tenet from the beginning as well, is that we needed to be there for anybody who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay. And so we will waive fees for people who can't pay them. So Peggy and I have now, it's 26 years later, memory care is just a phenomenal place, but it needed a new life. It's one of those kind of
was the right organization at the right time. And in order to have its next chapter, we needed to figure out how to launch it. We launched our baby. So they have wonderful leadership now. Mary is still in memory care, which is delightful. And but it's an independent organization. Maybe that was too much.
Because I was quite ignorant, so thank you.
Thank you.